My guest today survived a devastating car accident that took the lives of his wife and youngest son. In the moments surrounding that crash, he experienced something extraordinary. Leaving his body, encountering a love beyond words, and being faced with a choice about whether to return to this life at all. What followed wasn't a miracle cure or an easy spiritual awakening, but a long, painful recovery and a reckoning with grief, meaning, and why we choose to come here in the first place. Today, I'm sitting down with Jeffery Olsen, best-selling author, internationally sought-after speaker, and someone who's spent decades helping people navigate grief, resilience, and the deeper meaning of why we're here. Jeffery, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Paige, it's an honor. It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
I'm hoping that we can go back to life before the accident. Can you paint a picture for the listeners? And also, what role did faith and religion play in your life at that time?
Yeah, I was 33 years old. I was a young man, had a young family. I had started my own advertising agency and was working diligently, with clients and building that. And yeah, I suppose, religious. That's a loaded word these days, but I did have a religious practice. This whole experience has transformed that into something far more expansive. And you can call it spirituality, you can call it mysticism, you can call it whatever you want. We have all these words. But yeah, at that point in my life, I was religious, I was a believer. And I grew up in a conservative Christian home, which I embraced all of that and still embrace many of those values. However, like I say, that was expanded in magnificent ways through this whole near-death or out-of-body experience.
So let's go back to the day of the accident. Walk us through that day.
Wow. And it's been almost 30 years. It's been almost 3 decades. And there was a decade I couldn't even speak of it. I mean, it was just too painful and too personal. But the day that the accident happened, we had been on a little family road trip. We'd gone to see my wife's parents and her grandparents. It was the Easter weekend, so we had spent Sunday celebrating Easter. Monday morning came and, we were dragging along. I mean, I wanted to get on the road and get back to work and to life, but we had breakfast. We were still visiting. And we finally got everybody loaded up and ready to go. I'd put all the luggage in the car. I got the kids all secured in their car seats, and we were pulling away to make the 5-hour trip home. It was an interesting day. There's things that I will always remember. They weren't extraordinary, but in hindsight, they were. We were just pulling away. Everybody was buckled up in the car. My wife's parents were on the porch waving the way grandma and grandpa do. And I was just pulling away from the curb, and she said, "Stop, wait." And I assumed she must have left something in the house. I was expecting to hear, "Oh, my handbag is in the kitchen."
Right.
But I stopped the car, and she said, "I just want to say goodbye to mom and dad one more time." Now, I'll admit at that moment, I thought, well, come on, we already hugged, we said goodbye, let's get on the road. But I had stopped the car, and there was an earnestness about her request. And, I put the car in park, and she jumped out, and I observed as she ran back up to the porch. And she not only hugged them both, but she kissed them. Which wasn't out of the ordinary, but I noticed. I mean, here I am sitting watching as she does this. And she came running back to the car, joyfully, jumped in, buckled up, and we were ready to go. Like I say, it wouldn't have been completely out of the ordinary. But the reason I share it is because there must have been a whisper, a feeling and an intuition, if you will. Stop, wait. And I think we all get those whispers.
Right. Totally.
The beautiful part is she acted on it. Stop. I want to go say goodbye one more time, and she did. And Of course, as that day rolled out, the reason that is so poignant in my memory is that was the last goodbye. She got in the car, we got out on the interstate, I set the cruise control at 75 miles an hour, and away we went, embarking on this 5-hour road trip to get back home. And, there was a moment during that trip that I will always hold dear as well, and it was literally a moment. I mean, it was a glance in the rearview mirror. I was driving away, you know, racing up the interstate at 75, and I just glanced in the rearview mirror to look at traffic or see if there was any traffic. And in that glance, my youngest son, Griffin, it caught my eye. I noticed him there sound asleep in his car seat. And it's almost like time stopped. Like, there was this rush of, wow, there he is. He was our miracle boy. After our first son, we were told we may not have more children, and there he was, and beautifully sleeping. And I noticed details. I noticed how long his eyelashes were and the way his hands were sitting on the little, car seat tray. And it was just a glance, but there was so much to it because as I saw him and felt all that, I heard Spencer, my oldest son, and he was playing with action figures. So the car's filled with the joyful noise of a little boy, having this grand lightsaber battle or whatever he was doing. And
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 Spencer was 7
he was
and
7.
Griffin was 14 months?
Yeah, yeah, Griffin was just a toddler, Spencer was 7, he was a little boy. And, as I noticed the boys, I just glanced over and noticed Tamara, and she had also reclined her seat, and she was sound asleep, but she was still holding on to my hand. Um, it's a simple thing, right? However, I thought, "Wow, here we are 10 years into our marriage, and we got these beautiful boys, and we're chasing our careers, and she's still holding on to my hand." I just it was this moment of gratitude. Just absolute gratitude of like, "Wow, look what I'm surrounded with," and of course, my attention went back to the road, and I continued driving on, and it was probably an hour or so after that.
What an incredible amount of detail to take in such a quick moment.
Yeah, and I'm like I say, I remember it. Now, I may not have remembered that had the day not transpired the way it did, but it was a poignant moment, like time stood still, and I felt it. There was all this chatter in my head. I was thinking about what I've gotta do and the things at work, and gosh, I'm missing a day of work, I'm gonna be this far behind, and that's what was going on in my mind, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, suddenly all the energy went into my heart. It's like, "Oh, and there's my little boy, and wow, listen to the oldest one, and gosh, here's my wife still holding onto my hand," and it was really a grateful moment, and yeah, lots of detail in a brief second. And I've wondered if maybe life is that, like we just, it's just a whole series of moments,
Right.
seconds that it's string up like a string of pearls, and that's our life. That's our life. But it was about an hour after that experience that we had a horrific automobile accident, and there was reports of crosswinds. And I was aware of it was a windy day. There was reports of a pickup truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. And one of the most difficult parts about the story is I believe what actually happened is that I may have dozed off at the wheel. I may have just nodded off. And in doing that, I swerved to the right. I overcorrected to the left. And in overcorrecting, I lost control of the car. And the car began to roll. Not off the road, but down the road at 75 miles per hour.
Were you conscious during that?
I knew we were crashing. I blacked out for the actual rolling.
Right.
I was aware, "Oh my gosh, I've lost control." And as it went into a roll, I kind of blacked out, but I was completely conscious when the car came to a stop. I mean, oh, the car stopped. We'd been in an accident, and the first thing I heard was Spencer, my 7-year-old, crying hysterically in the back seat. He was crying, and my initial thought is, "I've gotta get to my boy. I've gotta get to my son." And that's when I realized I couldn't move. I was pinned, and I was a little disoriented, but I was conscious, and I wasn't aware of my injuries. Now, I was really banged up in the crash. What actually happened to me is both of my legs were crushed and shattered. The seat belt had cut through me and ruptured my insides. My back had been damaged, my shoulder had almost been torn completely off, and then my rib cage was damaged and my lungs were collapsing.
Wow.
So I was a mess, but I wasn't aware of the injuries. It's like, "My son is crying, I've gotta get to my boy."
Wow. So do you think that that was just adrenaline or
Yeah.
something that kicked in that you didn't even physically feel all of what just was happening to you?
I knew I was in pain, and I knew I was struggling to breathe, but the adrenaline was such that's like, "You gotta move, you gotta get to your son." And yet I couldn't move, and I'm hearing him cry, and he's hysterical in the back seat, and that's when I actually realized and I became aware because I could see everything around me. I knew no one else was crying, and I knew and I saw, and I don't go into those details. I mean, I can share some. This is part of the reason it took so long to even talk about it, but I saw and knew that both my wife, Tamra, and Griffin, my little boy, were gone. I knew that they were gone. They were killed instantly in the accident, and, I was actually pinned, like, under the car. The car was on the driver's side. I was in the driver's seat, but I had somehow kinda come out. I was pinned under the car, but I could see Tamra, and she was no longer with us, and I knew that Griffin had been let out, and that's probably more details than I've really shared publicly
My
at
gosh.
all, but it was horrific. I mean, it was the darkest place in.
Moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this moment of joy and gratitude, an hour before, and boy, in that moment, I mean, it's like my whole world was shattered, it's like, "What happened?" It's like, "Can't I get those 3 seconds back? What
Right.
happened?" And, I don't share that to be morbid or graphic, but that was the scene, and I was fully conscious at that point. And yet I knew I was fading fast. I was struggling to breathe. It felt like things were closing in, like felt like just darkness was closing in on me. And I remember saying, and actually my oldest son, Spencer, now is a full-grown man, obviously, but he remembers me saying to him, "It's going to be okay." And even as I said that, I thought, "It's such a lie. How is this okay?"
Right.
I mean, I was just in this absolute panic, and there's no other, it's just terror, panic, and everything's going dark, and I'm losing consciousness, and the last thing I remember was hearing people arrive at the scene. I mean, bystanders had pulled over, and the last thing I recall is hearing the emergency sirens approaching. So I was conscious to that point, but that's when I just went out, just went out, almost like fainting or almost when you have surgery and you're just out.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like, but at that moment, I also felt light. I felt light come. It's like light rushed to me, light surrounded me. It was tangible like a blanket or a bubble of light that felt comforting in the absolute hell, the terror I was in. And then suddenly it felt like I was rising above the accident scene and I could breathe and nothing hurt. And I was a little bit confused, like, how can I possibly be okay? And then as I came to terms with what's happening, suddenly Tamra, my wife, who I knew was deceased, she's right there in this bubble of light with me. She's right there.
Wow.
And she's gorgeous. She's very much alive. beautiful, radiant, and yet emphatic that I can't stay. I mean, just immediately, she's like, "Jeff, you can't be here. You gotta go back. You've gotta go back." We were literally having a conversation, and it was as emotional as it would be here, but even more real. It's like the senses were magnified,
Hmm.
and she's crying and upset. I mean, she kept pushing on my chest saying, you gotta go, you can't be here." And then she would pull me back in tight, and I would hold her, and I mean, we were crying. It was as emotional as it would be in this dimension, and yet here I was in this bubble of light, and we had the conversation. If I stayed with her, Spencer, our little 7-year-old, would be orphaned, and we made a choice. For whatever reason, she could not come back, and the extent of her injuries is probably the case, and although I was pretty banged up, I could come back, and she was emphatic, "You gotta go." And we made a choice. We made a choice that I would leave, I would go raise our son, and, it felt like my soul's journey. It's almost like I knew. It's almost like, "Yeah, I know, I gotta go back. Yeah, I get it. I wanna stay. I wanna stay, but I know I've gotta go back," and we said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say, and,
That out of body experience, it sounds very physical. Like you say, she pushed up against your chest and then she pulled you in, you embraced. So there was this element, although you were out of your physical body and you were in some sort of realm. Have you contemplated or thought about where that was?
I have. I mean, maybe it was a holding place. I mean, for
Mm,
whatever reason, you can't proceed. You gotta go. You can't, she knew if I went with her that that was the end. I don't know that I was at the final destination, wherever we go. And the physicality of it, was befuddling to me for a while. It's like, how was it so sensory if I'm out of my body?
right.
How could I feel her, and how could I hear her, and how could I and yet, like I say, the senses were expanded. Like, how is it that I'm tasting her tears and hearing her words and yet feeling all of it at every core of my being, whatever that being is? And this played out through the entire near-death experience and even the experiences in the hospital in a profound way. In fact, as we said that goodbye, and it's like, okay, I gotta go, and we have no idea how powerful our minds are. The intention of I'm going, okay, I'm going. I didn't have to figure out how to go. I made the choice, and then whoosh, I mean, it's like I almost immediately I felt, man, now I'm moving about a very busy level 1 trauma center,
Hmm.
emergency hospital. And when I say moving about, I'm moving about, and I'm aware in a very intense way of everything and everyone around me. I was aware of the doctors, the nurses, even other patients, even the families of other patients. It's like I had a 360-degree awareness of everything. And then everyone that I encountered, every person, every soul that I encountered, I knew them perfectly. They were strangers in this realm, but I knew them. I knew their love, I knew their hate, I knew their motivations, I knew their challenges, I knew their thoughts, I knew everything about them, and there was no judgment. There was this profound connection, this love. I call it a oneness.
Hmm.
And, one example that I've shared is, gosh, a nurse passes and completely unaware of me. Of course, I'm out of my body. I'm a spirit, I suppose, doing this, but I see her and I feel everything about her. I know her life. And when I say I feel, it wasn't just knowledge. It's like I felt her life. I felt the abuse that she had received as a child, horrible abuse. And I was aware of it, I felt it, it was almost like there was a connection, between like it wasn't mine, it didn't happen to me, but I knew it and felt it as if it was mine, or I shared it with her. And in that same instant, it's like, wow, look at her. Look at this person in the hospital, serving, healing, helping. I mean, and I saw this magnificence about, wow, look at who she is, not in spite of what happened, but actually because of what happened. There was no judgment, there was only love, only
Wow.
connection, only magnificence. And that, I mean, that's one example, but this was happening with everyone I encountered. And I would even be aware of, like I say, other patients and the patients' families.
What a phenomenal experience to be able to feel and know people's true essence. It's like you were connecting with them on a soul level, but like you say, almost that oneness of feeling it as if it was your own. And how beautiful without the human filter of the judgments of what people have gone through and just really looking at people with pure compassion, it sounds like.
I love what you said, Paige, the human filter. It's like suddenly that human filter's gone and there's something more divine beyond our humanness that connected us, that I felt. And there was so much love, so much honor. In fact, I mentioned I'd grown up in a conservative Christian home. As I'm having this experience, I did have it was a biblical verse. It was the famous verse where Jesus said, "Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of one of these, you've done it unto me." And of course, people asked, well, when did we do it to you? Well, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was a stranger, this verse, this notion came flowing through me. And I had grown up believing that was a nice verse about being nice to people. But when I say this expansiveness came in, suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, I get it. I am her. She is me. What Jesus was saying is, I am the beggar on the street. I am the man in prison. We are connected. We are one. And what I do to anyone else, I do to myself. And there's all these notions around that, but I was literally experiencing it in a profound way where, yeah, the only word I have is it was oneness. I was connected. And I was experiencing the connection we all have, and it did change me. I mean, judgments and comparisons just went out the window
Mm.
in this human realm, this human experience, because I felt I was seeing people perhaps how the divine sees them, how God might see them, how a greater, higher power may view us, each and every one of us, and it was nothing but love.
That is the most incredible thing. And so, this decision that you made with Tamara to come back and coming back, you were still in an out of body experience. So, you're in the hospital and you're moving about freely. Do you have any sense at this time of the physicality or what you were? Could you see
No.
yourself?
No, I was still me. I mean, in my consciousness.
Mm,
And the interesting thing is I then, eventually I came upon a body or a man lying on a gurney, and I didn't feel anything from that person. So I'm like, well, why would I feel such a connection to everyone but not this one? And in that confusion, and I was still unaware of my injuries, I stepped forward and looked. And that's when I realized, my goodness, that's me. But it wasn't that's my body. I mean, I was having this consciously connected experience, but there's my body. There's the skin suit. And yeah, it was so broken. And there was such a sadness. I'm like, oh wow. And ouch. And it was beyond ouch. It was this reverence, like, wow. I didn't realize what a miracle machine our bodies are. I mean, I'm looking at mine that is so badly broken and realizing I took it for granted. I didn't I mean, I didn't have to think about my heart beating or remember, for my heart to beat or remember that my lungs needed to breathe. I saw the body as this miraculous gift, this machine, that we have the human experience in and with, and mine was so badly traumatized, and I also knew I gotta get back with that body. I gotta get back in or with that body.
So it sounds like you had in that moment a level of gratitude for your body that maybe you hadn't had before.
Yeah, and I was always grateful to be healthy. I mean, gosh, I'd been a Division I athlete, I was healthy, I was fit, and yet here I am looking at this wreck. I was ventilated, and I mean, big tube doing the breathing for my lungs. I mean, both my legs had been crushed, my right arm was immobile. Yes, I had a deep sense of gratitude and a deep sense of sorrow of like, wow, look what happened to mine. And how am I gonna get through this? Especially now, I've given my word, I gotta come back, I gotta raise this boy, and I gotta get back in it. And that's when, again, I didn't have to figure out, how do I get in? It was the choice, the intention. I'm going back in. And then boom, back into the heaviness, the denseness, and that's what it felt like. It felt like I climbed under a lead blanket, it's just like, "Oh, wow." And then the pain, the grief, the trauma, the guilt, I mean, all of that just returned in heaping bags of weight. It was heavy. It was very heavy.
Because at the same time, you're waking up to the reality that your wife and your youngest son have passed. And so it's not only how do we heal this body, it's, how do you survive inside this body that's been permanently altered while carrying this level of grief that most people can't even imagine.
Yeah, and quite honestly, the grief was worse than the physical trauma. I
I
mean,
bet.
my leg was eventually amputated probably about 4 or 5 days in. They were trying to save it, they couldn't. I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. I mean, that was
Wow.
it was a long haul. That was 18 surgeries in all putting me back together, and there was all kinds of issues. I mean, there was horrible infections, the way my insides had all been ruptured and splattered around, and then, I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge in your lungs. I really should not have made it,
Did
and
doctors tell you that?
yeah. Yeah, in fact, there's an interesting part of my out of body or near death experience that happened in the hospital. And I didn't find this out till months after the accident, but there was a doctor. In fact, he was the attending physician at that level 1 trauma center and a nurse. And they later came back to tell me this, which was a miracle. But what they shared is that as I was life flighted in, as they were in the arena, the operating room, and there was all kinds of specialists working on me, everything from orthopedic to respiratory. There was a whole medical team. But the attending physician, his name is Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. He actually wrote a book about this. But as he came in simply to oversee, he wasn't involved in my hands on care. And he says, had he been involved in my hands on care, he may not have been privy to what was going on. But he said, as he stepped into the operating room, that he saw my wife's spirit standing in the air above the gurney.
Wow.
She communicated with him. Now, when he shared this, he didn't know me from Adam, and I had not shared with anybody that I'd had a near death or out of body experience. But the two of them came to see me after I was out of ICU. I was in surgical recovery. They had a day where they came and saw me, and they weren't in their scrubs, so I wasn't sure who they were. They just barely kind of let, I mean, immediate family had only been the ones to see me, and I think they were only letting 1 or 2 family members in, and I thought they were a couple because here's this man and woman comes walking in normal clothes, and I couldn't place them. I'm like, "Who are they?" I mean, I'm like, "They're not my neighbors. I don't think they're from work. I don't know these people." And they finally said, "We're members of your original trauma team." And the nurse started small talk. She sat down by me in the bed and she said, "Yeah, gosh, you're doing so well. We didn't think you were going to make it." Then she started to cry. and she said, "We gotta tell you why we came," and she's the first one. She said, "Your wife was in the operating room with you while we worked on you," and, of course, I started to cry, and I just I don't know, I just looked to the doc. He was kinda standing over leaning against the wall. She had drug him up there, he laughs and said, She kept telling me, we've gotta go tell that patient what happened." And he kept
Oh,
saying, "No, no, we don't have to tell a total stranger that we see dead people in the operating room. We're not doing it." But she inspired him and convinced him to come, and he was a little reluctant, and I looked at him, and he actually acknowledged, he said, "Yeah, she was there and she communicated with me." And I said, "What did she say?" And it's interesting, he said, "All she did was share her gratitude for what we were doing to save your life." And I burst into tears. I'm like, "Of course she did. That's exactly what she would do." And he had no idea that I'd made this deal. He had no idea that we'd had this conversation, that I'd had this out of body experience. And of course she was grateful that they were saving my life, because I had to make it. I had, we'd made this deal. So I burst into tears, and actually, the doc and I became good friends. It's been 30 years and we're still good friends. We get together and we talk about these things. He'd had many experiences in the ER. Mine was not the only one. He had had many things happen. He's a spiritual man and he sees things that other people don't. But on this occasion, both he and the nurse had experienced this. And yeah, they said, we didn't think you were going to make it. And they knew the leg was gonna be amputated. They knew I was a mess, and they were thrilled that I was doing so well. And, of course, they're really good. The medical staff, like, we wanna take credit, like, "We we brought you back from the dead," and yeah, they did,
they did.
they truly did.
I'm
Yeah.
so happy that they acted on, her strong intuition, obviously, to go tell you. What did that mean to you to hear them say that and to have, two medical staff almost confirm what you had already experienced?
It was very tender, and it meant a lot. I mean, I didn't need my experience validated. However, here was 2 strangers. It wasn't family, I mean, if I told my mom, "Gosh, I left my body and experienced love," she'd say, "Of course you did, sweetheart." I mean, but here were 2 strangers and they were clinicians. I mean, as I was in that moment, I actually shared with both of them. I said, "Well, I had an experience too." And as I shared, I thought, "You know what? If I'm crazy, they'll get me to the psych ward and get me the help I need because but they didn't. They just listened, and it meant so much to me that I could just speak it, and I only my mother and my younger brother knew that I had had any kind of an experience, and even with them, I still didn't share it openly or publicly for years, but I trusted them, and I trusted the doc, and I healed in miraculous ways, and I gained new friends with it. So, yeah, I probably shouldn't be here, but I am, and,
You're
I
meant to be here.
there's research on all of this of how many actually say, "Wow, I was someplace else. Wow, I had this incredible experience. Wow, I was visiting with my grandma," or, there's all kinds of stories around it, but this was a firsthand encounter of patient and medical staff, and we all had a spiritual experience at the same time. I think there's even a term now, they call it a shared death experience.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah.
Wow. So you are in the hospital for almost 6 months, correct? And it was 18 surgeries putting you back together. I can't even imagine just the days going through that, the physical pain, the emotional pain, the grief. You have another very profound experience happen to you towards the end of your hospital stay. And I'm wondering if you can share that story with our listeners.
Well, I would love to, and it may be the most profound. And it's probably worth pointing out that the 2 true, like, out-of-body near-death experiences were at the scene of the accident, before all the morphine and narcotics had been administered.
Right.
And then at the end of my hospital stay, when I'm off of the narcotics, I'm out of ICU, I'm out of surgical recovery, I'm out of the regular hospital. I was actually in the rehabilitation wing,
Okay.
and I was taking Tylenol. It wasn't like I was on heavy drugs. But on this occasion, you hit the nail on the head, Paige. I mean, the grief. My gosh, it was so heavy, so hard. I mean, Spencer, my little 7-year-old, would come to see me, and I mean, I'm in the hospital bed, and I'd always cover up the leg so he wouldn't see the amputation, and just trying to protect him. I
And
mean,
Spencer walked away from the accident relatively
he was
unscathed?
banged up. He cracked
Okay.
his wrist and he bruised up his ribs, but yeah, he basically walked away. They held him in the hospital for a couple days for observations, and of course, the family had to get sorted out of who was gonna take care of him, and he physically basically walked away, but emotionally, it was rough on him too, and, so the grief, the long months, all these things, and here I am in the rehabilitation wing, and I was finally able to lay on my side. They had stabilized my abdominal wounds, which had to be left open for months because of the infection, and yet they had stabilized that, and I was finally able to lay on my side, and I'd laid on my back so long, I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. The back of my head was bald, like, they that one of the nurses that had worked in pediatrics said, "That's what babies do. When they lay too long, they rub the hair off the back
Yes.
of their head," and I had laid there so long. Yeah, so the hair's all off the back of my head. My brothers are giving me a bad time about that, and my family, my brothers, I mean, that's what supported me through it all. But on this occasion, I was able to sleep on my side, and I fell into a deep sleep. And here's the interesting part. I'm sleeping, but I'm consciously aware, wow, I'm sleeping comfortably. I'm in a deep sleep. I've been unconscious. I've fallen asleep, but I was aware I was sleeping peacefully. So I don't know what that means, but as I became aware of that, I felt that light come again. That same tangible light, just like at the accident scene, and it surrounded me, and I'd been grieving so miserably over Tamara, my wife, and Griffin, my little boy, and so worried about what life was gonna look like, and as this light came, it was comforting me in all that grief, and again, it felt like I was rising above the hospital bed, but this time, the light dispensed. With Tamara at the scene of the accident, I was in a bubble of light, but this time the light, it lifted.
And when you're saying, like, you felt the light, was it a combination of felt it, knew it, saw it, like, all senses light?
All
Or I'm just
senses.
trying to
Yeah,
put
no,
myself in your position.
all senses. I saw light, I felt light, but what the overwhelming feeling was the comfort and the peace in this light, even in my grief, even in my injuries at the accident, the comfort and the peace. And as that's happening and the light dispenses, I found myself in a very beautiful place. I mean, a very beautiful place. For me, it was like a meadow. It's like it was open and the grass was waist high. I grew up on a ranch. It was like, gosh, and yet again, I could taste the sky. I mean, everything. The senses were so big, and I was whole. I had both legs and both feet. And, where I was, I guess you could say heaven, the other side, the spirit world, but the only word that comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I was home. It was so I was home and I was whole. I had both legs. I began to run, I'm running joyfully. I it was the most beautiful place and the most beautiful experience, and I could feel it physically. This is where, again, that physicality comes in. I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I could feel the intelligence in every toe and every calf muscle, and I'm running just joyfully thinking I'm home and I'm whole, I'm healed. And then I got the message I wasn't there to stay. And, at that same time, it's like this corridor, like this corridor appeared to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. And so I did. I began working my way down this corridor, and as I did so, at the end of the corridor was a crib. Now, my little boy Griffin was still sleeping in a crib at the time of the accident. He was 14 months, he was rambunctious, he was sneaking out of it at night and causing trouble. But I saw this crib and I'm like, I raced to this crib, and I had grieved so miserably about him. And I'd seen Tamara in these experiences. I hadn't had any encounters with him. And even as I shared, him being ejected from the car, the torment in a father's heart about what happened to my little boy. And so I raced to this crib and I look in and there he is. Um, and he's perfect. He's sound asleep, just like when I looked in the rearview mirror. And I'm looking at how long his eyelashes are, and I'm looking at him, and as a father, I just swept him up in my arms. I just picked him up, and and that was all physical too. There's a weight and a heat when you pick up a sleeping child. I'm sure
Yeah.
many of us have done that, and I felt that, like, wow, he's hefty and he's warm. And I held him against me, and he was solid, and I could feel his little rib cage expanding. I could feel his breath on my neck, and I thought, "He's okay. He's okay," and I began to weep just holding him and thinking, "Wow, I've got my boy," and as I held him, there was this presence behind me that was so overwhelming. It was so powerful, and so big, so cosmic, so wise, and I had the thought, "That's God." And I began to have the guilt bubble up in me again. That's God, and I'm in so much trouble. My little boy is here because I dozed off or overcorrected and crashed the car. And I'm holding my son and I'm weeping, and this presence is coming closer and closer behind me. And I'm having these thoughts of I've failed, as a father. And finally, the presence is right behind me. And I was frightened. I didn't want to turn around. I'd grown up believing that God was going to judge me, and I was probably in trouble, and that life was a test, and I was most certainly failing the test. And all those thoughts are bubbling up, and the presence is right behind me. And I had the thought, I hope I can somehow be forgiven. And in having that thought, that's when everything happened. I felt, and these almost felt physical too, these loving arms just wrap around and hold me and my little boy. And then there was this download. The first message was, there's nothing to forgive. It's all in divine order. And I even paused on that. Here I am arguing. I'm like, how can that be? My little boy's here, my wife's there. I'm maimed for life. How can that possibly be? And then in the arms of the divine, I began to see my life, and I'm watching my life, and
Like a life review?
like a life review. Really, it's like, excuse me, I still
That's
get
okay.
emotional talking about it. I'm looking at my life, and, I saw my parents divorce, and I saw that the insecurity that caused in me, and I saw where I began to believe I had to be the guy that got the grade and made the team and proved that it wasn't my fault, and yet in these loving arms, everything was different. Everything, there was no judgment. I was having all the judgments, but the beloved being that held me had only love. And it was so profound because, I would see things and think, well, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. I'm justifying it. The divine being, God, if you will, said, there are no mistakes. What did you learn? What did you learn? That was it. Well, what did you learn? And when you made that choice, what did you learn? There was no judgment about what had happened or what I had
Mhm.
done, only what did you learn? And I even saw things where I'm like, "Well, that was wrong. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway." And what was communicated to me was, "Well, that is your judgment of it, and that's fine, but we love you." I mean, and I say "we," I was in the arms of what felt like a benevolent God, and yet it felt like the entire universe was watching my life, and there was no judgment. There was just this pure, unconditional love. And when it was communicated, "We love you," here I am holding my own boy. And I'm like, yeah, he's perfect. He's divine. He is beloved. So that was multiplied. I'm holding my child, and I'm in the arms of God that's treating me as if I'm their child, and it's really difficult to put words to the experience, but there was so much love, no judgment, and I'm seeing my son as perfect, and I'm being held in the essence that, and it took me for that I'm perfect, that
Mhm.
everything is in perfect order, and, um, I was tutored on choice, I mean, I was still believing that life was a test and I had failed, and in fact, what God said to me is, "Oh, my dear boy, life is not a test, it's a gift. Every day is a gift."
Hmm.
I was told I could be mad at God the rest of my life if I chose, and that's okay. They'd love me anyway, you know, or I could beat myself up the rest of my life because I was driving the car, and that would be okay. Free will and choice was the echoing. The only rule was I get to choose, but I was told also that I could make a new choice, and this was, maybe mind-blowing and earth-shattering to me because God said to me, "I want you to exercise your will." And I'm like, "Well, hold on a minute." Given my upbringing, I'm like, "It's your will be done." I've been taught that since I was a little boy. And what was communicated, and it took me a long time to ever share this publicly too, I was told, "My will is your will. That's how much you're loved. My will is that you have free
Mm.
will. You get to choose." And as that came through, I was told, "You can give your son. You can hand him over. You can exercise your will." And it might not feel like he was torn away or that, that you were wronged in some way. And in all that love and all that peace and all that beauty and all that unconditional lack of judgment, I did. I kissed my little boy, and I put him back in the crib, and then, then I'm back in the hospital bed, back to the amputation and all the injuries and all that was happening, and, um, and I had a different perspective. I'm like, "Wow, we are that loved?" I
Mhm.
mean, I had believed God loved us, but I experienced on a very personal level unconditional, honoring love that is beyond, yeah.
It's so relatable when you spoke about how, you felt like you had to be that person who needed to be on the sports team or needed to get grades or needed to be married or needed to, be successful in work in order to be something, in order to be accepted, in order to be loved. And here you are in the arms of God. And it's like, none of that matters. Doesn't matter what you are. It doesn't matter what you do on this planet. It's you're loved, you're loved. I love that too, like the free will of it all, like the gift that is free will, that we're not living this life and it's all laid out in front of us and we have to do something, and if we don't do it then we're not going to heaven. It's like you get to choose, you get to create, and that there is no judgment. What a peaceful thought.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was very real to me. It was very, um it changed me. It really changed me. I mean, I've been accused of being too soft and too kind and too generous and all these things, but having experienced that and then coming back into the third dimensional realm And it was interesting to think, wow, I get to choose. I have free will in every moment. And, I mean, part of me is like, well, let's go rob the bank, but that was also like, no, it's like, well, there may be consequences to that, and that would be perfect for you. You're only here to learn. There was no judgment, just you're there to learn.
Right.
And, but yeah, it shifted things, and
It sounds like there was a shift from life is happening to me to life is happening for me. Or like or
yeah,
by me. Life is happening by me. Like there's almost this element of you created it or signed up for it. Like that's what it sounds like with this life review. That's what I'm hearing. Is that something that was revealed to you?
absolutely, absolutely, and that was mind-blowing and earth-shattering as well because I still had the why question, why? Why? And what I felt in the arms of the divine was that my soul had created it, that my soul wanted to come and have the experience that would truly allow me to learn forgiveness, to learn trust, to learn love. In fact, I was only asked one question. The one question that came through that it's like, to what degree have you learned to love? And it's like, well, gosh, yeah, I love my son. Yeah, I love pizza. It's like, what is the, what is that word? But it was like, to what degree, and maybe in all of it, to what degree did I learn to love myself? To truly embrace and love and forgive and cherish myself and my own life. Um, and given my upbringing, I mean, it's like, well, yeah, it's right there, love your neighbor as yourself. But I was really good at loving the neighbor, but it's like, oh, well, gosh, if I'm not loving myself, then what capacity do I have to love anybody? And no wonder we're at war and divided. It's crazy, right?
Mhm. I think it's such a beautiful example that you were shown when you're holding your baby and just seeing the perfection of him and just how much love and reverence and gratitude and appreciation you have for this little soul and then getting that message this is how we see you. You're that little baby. You're that little soul and everybody is. We see you all the same way. Like what a beautiful message and any parent out there, we all know such a beautiful, strong love you have for your children. But can we accept and acknowledge that we are that loved and love ourselves like that little baby? Like, has that been something that you've been working through, or was that like an instant kind of knowing when you had that message and that download?
No, that was a working through. I mean, that was a working through, and like I say, it's been 30 years. I mean, and all kinds of things have happened. I've made interesting choices, and yet I've learned from all of them. And, in fact, that was the big breakthrough. I wouldn't talk about it in public. I only a few close friends and family members knew what happened. And, I mean, here I was even in the arms of God being told, everything's perfect and you're perfect and, but until I healed from the inside out, no external force could ever bring that. And it wasn't until I forgave myself and came to terms with self-love that I could ever really tell the story. Otherwise, I'd just kinda hold it tight and not share it. Yeah.
So that was a process
It was a process.
afterwards.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was
Okay.
probably it's I'm still in the
Still in
process.
it.
Let's be honest, yeah, I mean, 30 years, well, I'm still not there, but I'm learning every day. Gosh, I mean, the little things are the big things. Now I find so much joy in a sunset, I'll sit there and weep, watching the sky turn gold and purple and think, "Wow, I get another day. I get another day."
So, Jeff, what was it like going home?
Boy,
And I actually do mean not the going home, the spirit world home, because that's the true home.
yeah, home with a little
But
H, not a capital H, not a capital
exactly.
H, home with a
Yes.
little H.
Yes.
It was interesting. As I returned home, when I was released from the hospital, My left leg was amputated, and they were still dealing with infections. My right leg was in a brace. They had tried to repair the knee, and there was 6 pins and a plate holding that together, still are. My
Wow.
right arm was in a sling. My shoulder had been completely torn out, and they had done all the, rotator cuff repair, and they were doing shock treatment to see if they could get those nerves to regenerate into the muscles. And I had a colostomy bag with the intestines, so basically all I had was my one left hand, and I could drive an electric wheelchair, but I really couldn't even get in the wheelchair by myself with no limbs but one arm functioning, and that was the state of going home. I mentioned my brothers. I mean, my gosh, they were right there. They came to get me. My younger brother had taken Spencer into his home and just raised him like one of their own. But they literally had to pick me up and put me in this wheelchair. Then I'd drive around, and they were emphatic I'd be independent. And coming home with a little H, I went to my brother's house. I had home health. They had set up one of his extra bedrooms with a hospital bed. I was gonna have to have physical therapy and occupational therapy and nurses still coming in, and anyway, that was the state of how I was, but my biggest concern was not physically, again, it was emotionally, it was Spencer. Like, how's my little boy gonna handle this? I mean, I was the rough and tumble dad running around, and I was confined to a wheelchair with all the injuries, and, of course, my brothers came to take me home that day, and they got the electric wheelchair, got everything loaded up, and we're heading to my brother's house, and I'm so worried about Spencer, like, how's he gonna deal with this? It was one thing in a hospital bed, but now I'm gonna be on his turf. We're gonna have to go to the grocery store, you know? And I looked like a monster in my mind, and I'm worried about it. We arrive at the house, we pull up in the driveway, and I could see Spencer, like, looking out the window watching, as his uncles, my brothers, lift me, his dad, into the electric wheelchair. And they're lifting me in the wheelchair, and I get in it, and they'd build a ramp for me to get in the house. They're like, "You gotta do it yourself." And he came running out the front of the house, and he came running right toward me, and he ran right past me. And I thought, "Oh, man, it's too much, it's too much. He can't handle all this." And I'm heartbroken, and I'm heading up toward the ramp, and I turned the electric wheelchair to navigate up the ramp, and I just happened to look and see where he went. And what he'd actually done is he'd ran past me, and when I looked, he had gone across the street and he began knocking on all the neighbors' doors.
Oh,
And he's shouting, come out, my dad has made it home, come see my dad."
oh, what a sweetie.
Yeah,
Oh,
I burst into tears, and he ran and made the loop, knocked on all the doors, and he came and jumped on my lap, which almost killed me because I still had all the sutures and everything from the abdominal repair. But I'm there sitting in the wheelchair, and I had a grand epiphany, really. I mean, here I was all banged up, and I'm in a wheelchair, and I'm holding my living son in this realm, and suddenly it's no less divine than being in the other realm, holding my son that had passed in the arms of God. I mean, I'm right here, right now. There was nothing to become. There was simply to be in that perfect moment and feel the unconditional love of my surviving son, and, heaven was right here. I mean, it was right here, and I held that tightly. It's like, wow, maybe this is heaven. Maybe our whole role is to embrace heaven here.
it's like that little pearl moment that you spoke about at the beginning. It's just sitting into it and really appreciating it
Yeah,
for what it is.
yeah, and that was coming home, and eventually we got to my own home, and it was nuts. I mean, I was in a wheelchair, and we had several levels. I had to scoot up the chair on my butt, and I'm trying to raise my son, and I'm trying to get back to work, and it was a lot, but I eventually was fitted with a prosthetic limb, and my son was a Star Wars fan, so here he is at this point, probably at the tender age of 8, and I'm explaining, "They're gonna get me a Darth Vader leg, and I'm gonna learn how to walk," and anyway, life has moved on in a beautiful way,
Mhm.
and I'm still learning. and I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
People will say, "Well, how did you what did you," and it's like, "I don't know." You take it one day at a time, you take it one moment at a time, and you do the best you can with what you've got. But what I do honor is there is unconditional love, that we are all one and connected, and that free will, I get to choose. And those are the things that came back and I've held on to and that have been my personal private mantra through the whole process.
Those are profound. About a year after the accident in your home with Spencer and kind of getting used to this new normal, and you meet a woman named Tanya.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that story and how Tamara was involved?
Yeah. There are no accidents, and there's the things that nobody would believe and you can't make up. That's what's real. I didn't date. I wasn't looking. I was just committed to raising my son, and yet I was a young man. I mean, at this point, I'm probably 35, and she came on the scene, and I met her at a work thing. I mean, I didn't even meet her. Like there was a whole group there. It was a presentation, and she happened to sit across from me. But the strange thing is, I was having this profound deja vu in that moment from when I met Tamara the first time. And I thought, "Am I losing my mind? Am I just too lonely?" I even had guilt over that. I think I have a guilt complex. I remember when I'm falling in love with Tanya and I find myself at the graveyard and I'm angry at Tamara, my late wife. I'm saying, "How dare you? You left," and I'm here trying to raise our son and I'm limping around on a cane, and I swear she came to me on that occasion. I didn't see her, but I felt her presence, and she actually communicated to me that Tanya would teach me unconditional love, and I had no idea at the time what that might mean. But Tamara, my deceased wife, said, "Look, you have free will. You get to choose. You can choose whoever you want. She'll teach you unconditional love." And I got the sense, I got the knowing that Tamara wanted me happy. It was kinda like, "Look, choose joy. Free will, you have a choice. Choose." Tanya and I were eventually married. We adopted 2 boys. So, yeah, life goes on. Life happens, and we are all gonna learn, and we're gonna have heartbreak and grief and hurt, but with that, there's gonna be joy and bliss, and, I suppose we signed up for all of it. We
Mm,
wanted we said, "Hey," at least I must have said, "Hey, give me it all. I want, uh, I want to experience all of it, that my soul will expand," and yet I had no idea how difficult or how hurtful that might be.
mhm,
Also had no idea the depths of the joy and the happiness and the bliss that one might experience in the human journey.
mhm.
Yeah.
That's something that I got from reading your book, Jeff. There's so many beautiful mystical encounters that you've experienced, the ones that you've outlined in this podcast, but honestly, we could do multiple podcasts of all of the encounters you've had, which is pretty incredible. The prophetic dreams, the, special moments at special family occasions that have happened. But something that I wasn't expecting when I read your book was that more than half of it is the aftermath of the accident, and it's the integration, and it's choosing joy, and it's moving on, and it's struggle. It's not easy, and it's very raw and very vulnerable, and I think it's a beautiful book for anyone who's lost somebody, but for anybody who's gone through or going through a difficult season or time in their life. I found that this book it's so relatable even if you haven't lost somebody. So my question to you is, for somebody listening who's maybe going through a difficult season of life, they're going through a loss, or they're going through a divorce, or they're going through just the season where they feel like they need answers or guidance or something. What can you offer them based on teachings and the wisdom that you were shown and given?
Wow. Keep breathing. Keep and when you're in it, sometimes it is, if I can just get to the next breath. and then I might get to the next minute, and I might get to the next hour, and I might get through this day. Keep breathing and feel it. I've always said you gotta feel it to heal it and let the grief flow. I mean, grief is love, whether that's grief in the loss and death of someone, or that's grief in a divorce or a relationship ending, or that's grief in, gosh, losing a limb or, losing a job, whatever it is, there's grief. There's grief. But grief may be the most magnificent form of love we ever experience. I mean, we only grieve because we hurt. We only grieve and hurt because we loved. It's not that love always hurts, but grief is a profound feeling of love because we miss them, or they touched our lives, or they moved and inspired us in some way. Yeah, so those that are in it, gosh, find someone to talk to, and you don't have to say anything. I mean, I've found that people, well, Jeff will know what to say. Hey, gosh, this guy just lost his wife and his child. Jeff, can you come? I don't have a thing to say, and I'm not going to pretend to know how anyone feels, but find someone to sit with, even if it's in silence, and just be with each other and support each other and keep breathing. It will get better. I will never say, "Oh, yeah, you'll get over it." No, you don't. You get used to it. You get used to it. In fact, Dr. O'Driscoll shared this with me. He said, "Grief is like a stone you carry in your pocket. It never goes away, but you do get used to the weight." And, yeah, keep breathing, reach out to someone, reach into the divine realms. I mean, I asked why so many times and so much, and it wasn't until I shifted my why to what. What am I learning? What is my soul experiencing, and how does that expand me? The one thing in my near-death experience is I felt, wow, we're eternal beings. We're having this little human experience, but we're eternal. And so whatever is expanding my soul or expanding my consciousness or driving me deeper into compassion and maybe even empathy, that's what I get to take with me. I
Hmm.
don't get to take the fancy horse or the pickup truck, no, but I get to take what I've learned and I get to implement it as wisdom. And if you're really hurting, you're one of the noble and great ones that chose into having the experience that you would hurt, that your soul would expand, and therefore you might have more compassion and more empathy than someone who's never been through it.
Do you feel like your level of compassion and empathy has grown and has expanded?
Absolutely. I used to be, before the accident, I was a red personality. I'm going to beat the other guy. I'm going to win. I'm going to get that client. I'm going to, I mean, I was very competitive, very driven. And yeah, after all that's gone on, I don't judge anybody. I don't know their journey. And I've been known to hug homeless people in the streets and and to look at both sides of everything. In looking at both sides, there does come compassion. There does come empathy, even if one is the villain. Well, what happened in their lives to make them feel like that and choose that?
Right. I love that, like, switching the "Why is this happening to me?" to "What am I learning?" That's a really key, and easy takeaway for people. So if you are somebody who's going through something in your life, and we all are, we all, we either are or we have, and life is just like that. But what are we learning? Because in some way, we chose it. We chose it to learn and to grow and to expand. Jeff, there's a really touching part in your book where you have this moment when you are adopting your sons,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering if you can share that story.
Wow. Yes. In my life, I mean, gosh, I never imagined adopting children. That was not in the cards. I hadn't even, I mean, the life circumstances happens, but the most touching part to me, and perhaps this is what you're referring to, is I sat with the birth mother. We adopted 2 boys. They're brothers, but one was a toddler and one was a newborn. when we sat with the birth mother and she was releasing the toddler, like handing him over, and here's this little pregnant mama, who's going to have his brother, but has chosen to give them something different. Um, we sat with her for 6 hours, and I kept telling her, "You don't have to do this. It's okay. We're not, we can all go our separate way because it took that long." She just struggled, and, oddly enough, she handed him he finally fell asleep. This is Zach, my middle boy. For whatever reason, she handed him to me and not to Tanya. And here I took this little child, and I had this huge flashback of when I was handing Griffin back to God, this responsibility of, wow, wow. And the love, the unconditional love of a mother to think, I want him to have more. And adoption has a wound. My boys have been through it. Like, why would my birth mother, you know, give me up, is what they say. Or no, I watched that process, and that was love. And then when the little brother was born, the birth mother stayed in the vicinity, and she was going to have my youngest, Aiden. And at first, she just wanted Tanya in the room. But then the day of, it's like, hey, she's going into labor. Jeff, would you be willing to come to the birthing room? And interesting enough, it was the local hospital. It was the same room my son Spencer was born in, ironically. I don't know if I put that in the book or
Whoa.
not, but it's a nice birthing room, and there's a window, and there's a couch, and they've got, so I'm kind of over on the couch, and the little birth mother's going into hard labor, and Tanya's sitting by her, and it's a painful and traumatic process. She's having this child, and I'm sitting over on the couch, kind of observing, but minding my own business. I'm not getting too close. And finally, the birth mother starts to say, Jeff, get over here, get over here. And I'm like, oh no, I'm okay. But she said to me, are you the father of this child or not? And I'm like, well, my initial thought was, well, no, I am not the biological father. But again, that's what my mind said. My heart said, I am the father of that child. And I went over, and gosh, the doctors put gloves, and I caught that little boy and cut the umbilical cord and gave him his first bath, just like I had done, Griffin or Spencer, and Zach had already been born. But yeah, there's been some moments in my life, and that one was one of them, where it's like receiving Zach and having that flashback to handing Griffin over to God, and then being in the room as Aiden came in the world, watching him take his first breath, and just realizing we are one. I don't care who, there's biology, there's family, but I have a huge belief, or maybe even a knowing, that we have soul groups, and there's people that come into our lives however they come, and that's what matters. That's what to pay attention to.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that story. What do you wish people knew about death that would actually help them live more fully now?
Wow. Death gives life meaning. I mean, truly, truly, it's like I've been watching all these football playoffs and everything, and perhaps death is when the buzzer goes off. Perhaps death is when the game's over, and we get to review. Well, how did I play? Did I give it my all? Did I say the things I wanted to say? Did I do the things I wanted to do? And also, death was the most natural thing. I mean, people could say I died a traumatic death, the car crash and what I witnessed, and then going. But I'll tell you, that light and leaving the body, if you will, was the most natural and the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. So if you've had loved ones pass and you've been haunted, like, was there trauma? How did they feel? I had some pretty serious injuries, and I left my body. I wasn't even aware of their injuries, and leaving the body was the most beautiful, natural, loving thing I'd ever felt. That light came and took me home with the capital H. It's part of a natural process, part of a natural process.
It sounds like we don't actually die. Like our
No,
true essence doesn't
no,
actually die.
nobody dies. I've never been more alive than when I was actually out of the body or what we call dead. And, um, and yet if we can infuse that into our life. I saw a funny comic the other day, and these two folks were sitting on a bench, and somebody says, "Hey, you only live once." And the other guy responded, said, "No, you only die once, but you live every day." And that's what we can learn about death. It might be the final buzzer to this iteration of our consciousness or our soul or our existence. But wow, let's make it worth it, and let's take care of each other, and let's love each other, and let's have fun,
Mhm.
and let's be a little less judgmental and a little more accepting.
That's something that I definitely clocked when you were describing your experience of being in this limited body, this hurt body, and then having the out of body experience and just the physicality of it, the feeling of your legs and your limbs and all of that. Like, it just seems like you were just, like you said, you were whole. You were whole there and you didn't have the emotional or the physical pain anymore. So that's something to look forward to.
People think I'm morbid. It's like, oh, I'm like, "Oh, I don't fear death. I quite look forward to it."
Mm,
However, I'm happy to live here till I'm 106, whatever age we go to.
yeah.
I even tease people now, I have no age. I'm eternal, I'm ageless, and as I grow older, I'll probably be even more adamant about that.
That's awesome. How is your perception of God, faith, and religion changed after your experience?
Oh, that's a great question, and I said some of those things. I used to believe that God was a judge, the ultimate judge, and that life was a test, that I had to do all these things, and I certainly had to do it right, or I wouldn't be qualified, or wouldn't be loved, or wouldn't make it home. What has shifted is the God that held me was so loving. And if religion brings you closer to that divine, then do it. Um, and what really shifted is perhaps to see the divinity in others. Rather than making God out there somewhere. I mean, I've seen God in the eyes of a homeless man, you know? And the real trick for me is to look in the mirror and see God within myself. But that's the expansionness. I have nothing against religion. Um, any practice that brings one closer to the divine within themselves and allows them to recognize it in others, that's a good thing. And if religion doesn't work, then gosh, go sit on a rock or get out in the wilderness and look at a tree or the mountain or the sunset or the clouds. It's funny. I was hiking. This was years ago with my boys, and I don't hike well with a prosthetic limb. And they were old enough, they were old enough that they could go on. We were going to Elephant Rock. They knew the way. My oldest son was there. He could guide him and bring him back. And I said, I've just got to sit here and wait. So I sat on a rock and I was feeling sorry for myself and I was angry. I can't even hike with my boys. What kind of a life, I was in it. And as I was sitting there, I noticed all these wild flowers. And I thought, gosh, those are fantastic. I didn't even see those. And it's like my mind shifted. And I still read biblical stuff. I still embrace my upbringing. But I heard when Jesus was saying, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. And I'm like, oh, I'm looking at them. And yeah, they don't argue about who's what color or what's going on. They just reach for the light and thrive. And I almost saw, like, envisioned this Sermon on the Mount where here's this magnificent teacher, prophet, divinity, however you hold this fellow we call Jesus. But I heard the last verse of the Sermon on the Mount where he says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And, I've always thought, gosh, I should have turned around when I was in that other realm. I was too scared. I didn't look. But as I was envisioning this, the verse came different, and I'm not trying to change the Bible or anything like that, but the verse came in, and what I heard as I was kinda seeing in my mind's eye this Sermon on the Mount, it said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God in everything and in every one." And I'm like, "Oh, doesn't say that in my pages here, but I like that, and I embraced that." And if religion and belief has expanded for me, it's to, yeah, to not look for God out there, but to embrace the kingdom is within me and within you and within every one of us if we can simply be awake enough to see it.
Mm. Jeff, do you have a daily spiritual practice?
I do, and it changes sometimes. I love to be outside. I love to watch the sunrise or the sunset, one of them, and on my lucky days, both of them. I watch the light, I mean, when I talk about that light came around me as the sun comes up, it shines its light on everything, without judgments or comparisons, and everything in that light thrives. I mean, it grows, it flourishes, and then when the sun sets, gosh, I call it a sacred time when Father Sky kisses Mother Earth on the forehead with this promise, "I'll be back. You can count on me. I'm consistent and I'll be back." I lean into that. It's like, yeah, I've been granted this day, and yeah, I may get tomorrow, and sometimes we don't get tomorrow. I mean, live your life that way. You don't always get tomorrow. But the spiritual practice is to be outside, to notice light. I pray, I reach out to the divine, or call it meditation, or call it, before the accident, I would say prayers. Now I shut up and listen. I just shut up and listen, like, what can I do? How can I be? Where can I go? What can I say? And the most profound experiences is when I simply ask, what can I do for someone else today? And immediately there's an idea. I'll see a friend's face. It might be, call your mom. You haven't talked to your mom in a week, and then do it. Whatever images, whatever ideas come in, do it. And that's what keeps me connected to the earth, which connects me to myself, which then connects me to something much greater. And yeah, it's a simple practice.
Well, you've done so much for us by sharing this story. I'm so curious about you sharing your story. You said that it took, years in order for you to start sharing it. And when doing research for this, I saw that you have done lots of, podcasts and interviews, and you're an international speaker. You've written this book. This podcast is called Meant to Be Heard. It's all about sharing these stories that people have experienced firsthand and sharing them with more people so that we can all gain and learn the wisdom. So I want to know, what has sharing and talking about your story over the years done? Has that been healing? Has it been cathartic for you?
It has. And I never intended to write a book or share the story. I'd told the people I love under my roof, and they knew. I had a profound experience at one point. I had a neighbor that said, "Something happened to you, didn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, but I don't talk about it." And she said, "Well, I want you to talk about it. I want to come over and you tell me what happened." And I trusted her and I shared with her. And then she said, "Oh, you gotta come and talk to the guys at the university. There's a guy I know, he studies these near-death experiences." And I said, "No." And she said, "Oh, come on." And he did. He's like, "What does a Buddhist experience as opposed to an atheist or a Christian or whatever?" He was studying all the diversity within a near-death experience. And I shared with him, and he said, "You've gotta come speak to our group." And I'm like, "No, I don't know. I don't do this." And he said, "Jeff, people are grieving. They've had loved ones pass, and this might assist them." And so I went and spoke to the group. And, there's no accidents in life. So I finished up, and that was the first time I'd publicly shared it. And it wasn't a big group, and I'm crying, the tears are rolling down. And this guy comes up from the back and says, "You're going to write a book." And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "I own a publishing company." And this was a Friday night. That Monday morning, he had gotten my contact information from the organizers of this event, and there was a book contract in my email. And I'm like, "Oh, no." Number one, why did I go give that speech? And what do I do with this? And I don't want to write a book, and I'm not a writer. Anyway, I went to the scene of the accident, and And I asked, I mean, I reached out to the creator and said, "There's an email in my and there's a book, and I don't wanna write a book," but I asked, and it came to me very profound and clear that day, and I can quote what I was told. It's that voice that speaks to the heart, but I was told, "Share your experience, and others will heal." And I thought, "Oh, so it's not about me, it's about others." And I had done some healing. This was about 10 or 11 years after the accident. And to wrap this up and answer it in a concise way, I've experienced that. I mean, gosh, I get emails, and one time I got an actual letter. In fact, this was very early on. I got a letter in the letterhead of the publisher, the letterhead, and I thought, "Oh, man." I mean, these were the barriers to writing a book. It's like, number 1, I don't want people to think I'm crazy. Number 2, I don't want them to think I'm special or think I'm special, because 'cause I'm not.
Mm,
And then there was that whole thing of, am I that guy that would collect a royalty check on a book that involved the catastrophe of losing half my family, and I was driving the car? I mean, that was a big one, and I did the book, and, much to my surprise, I mean, I figured my mom will buy a copy, who cares, but it hit number 3 on Amazon, and all of a sudden, here comes this letter from the publisher, and I'm thinking, "This is that royalty check. Hmm, how am I gonna feel about this?" Anyway, I opened the envelope, and it was a little 3 by 5 card. It wasn't a check at all, and it had a little hand scratch on it, and I thought, "What is this?" I turned it over, it was jail mail. It was from an inmate in prison up in Vancouver,
wow.
and that's how they do it. They monitor all their mail. They just have to write on a 3 by 5 card, and that's how it's sent, and he had sent it to the publisher because that's the only address he could get from the book, but the little card said, "I read your book, and it changed me." He said, "I lost my family too, not to death. They left me. I made a horrible choice. I'm in a penitentiary. I'm paying my price." And he said, "But I know I'm loved, and I know I can heal." And I'm like, "That's the greatest royalty check I'll ever get." And I
1000%.
still have the card. It's in my little box of sacred things, and that's when I thought, "That's the guy. That's the one." I mean, I didn't care how many read it. It didn't matter, but if others heal, and certainly he did, and I've had a myriad of people who have found peace, or found the divine, or found the love within themselves, and that makes it worth it. That's what makes it worth it.
I don't know if I'll include this in here, but and I don't know if you remember my initial email to you, but what drew me to your story in the first place when I first heard it was my grandfather. So in the 1950s, my grandfather was in a horrific car accident where his wife and 4 young children passed immediately on the scene, and he woke up 3 weeks later to them buried. And I often have thought, how can someone move on from that? Like, how do you have a life after that? And, my grandfather met my grandma, and she was also a widow. She had 3 young children, and he adopted them. And then they had 3 children of their own, one being my dad. And I've also thought, if all of those people didn't die, I wouldn't be here. There's a lot of my family that wouldn't be here right now. And and I never got to talk to my grandfather about it because I was 14 when he passed. So reading your book, there was this it was nice to see a little bit of like, I don't know if it was closure or, just getting into the psyche of what you were going through at that time, but also, seeing the joy, choosing joy and having that be a choice for you and moving on with Tanya and and adopting your children and Spencer and having this life and choosing joy instead of, guilt and torment. I do believe my grandfather did the same thing. And I don't know if he had a spiritual experience. I mean, he could have, and maybe it was just something they couldn't talk about in the 1950s. But it gave me peace to read your book. So thank you for sharing.
You're so welcome, and what an incredible man your grandfather must be, and I guarantee you he chose joy. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's and you're
100%.
you're you're passing that on, and I bet he's up there just clapping and laughing and blowing you
Yeah.
kisses all over 'cause they don't die. They're still connected and they know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Mm,
Oh, Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you,
thank
thank you,
you.
thank you. For all the listeners, Jeffrey's book, Knowing, is incredible. I absolutely loved it. And you also wrote another book with your son, a children's book called Where Are You? And it's from the perspective of your son, correct? Losing
Yes.
his family members. And so, if any of the listeners know any children who have lost somebody important to them, a grandparent, a parent, a sibling, this is a beautiful, beautiful gift. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate your time and thank you for all that you do. And thank you for sharing your story. You're meant to be here.
You're so welcome and thank you.
Mm. Thank you so much for tuning in to Meant to Be Heard. If this episode resonated, please share it with a friend, rate the podcast, and hit follow so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at You're Meant to Be Here with a 2. New episodes drop Mondays. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you're meant to be here.